Hey friends, Rob Phoenix Hexameister here. Hope you're all doing well. Earlier today I was watching a video about the history of the Golden Dawn, which that's always fascinating to me. But I think we really cannot understate the influence that the Golden Dawn had on pretty much the neopagan movement and modern magical lodges and schools of thought and such. Um, Essentially, the Golden Dawn was born out of the Rosicrucian, I guess, cult, religion, movement. I'm not sure. Rosicrucianism is basically like mystical Christianity. Um, so out of Rosicrucianism, that's where we see things like the runes. Like it was a Rosicrucian that created the runes that we know today that are used by um, Germanic pagans. Those runes were created by a mystical Christian. He was inspired by the Hebrew alphabet and how the Hebrew letters all had sort of a power and an expression of their own. And he wanted to do something like that, but with a Germanic flavor and utilizing old runic symbolisms and such. And so he created the alphabet that we now know today. That's used by a lot of traditions. So the Rosicrucians, out of Rosicrucianism, also was birthed the Golden Dawn. And the Golden Dawn was an interesting kind of mix of Christianity, mystical Christianity, Rosicrucianism, Kabbalah, and even like the ancient Egyptian kind of symbology and what they believed was ancient Egyptian mysticism. They were doing tarot cards and studying crystals and doing things like I can't think of magnetism and such. So all of this stuff was a part of the Golden Dawn, and then there were different levels and things you could learn and work your way up to. But from the Golden Dawn, that's where modern quote-unquote witchcraft was born. Between the Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley, like those influences, because even like Dion Fortune was of the Golden Dawn. And I believe Gerald Gardner was a Golden Dawn member, blended with some Aleister Crowley stuff, and created what's known as modern witchcraft. And so it cannot be understated that like all of these things have like Christian roots, which I think is fascinating. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing that up is because recently somebody said, oh, something you're doing seems very Wicca inspired. Actually, no. Well, first of all, I trained in traditional witchcraft, so I do still have some holdovers from those days. And so if I'm doing something like inspired by the work that I learned back then, I always preface it with like, this is something I learned. This is not necessarily powwow, but I use it in my powwowing work. But we have to remember the roots of this stuff are very much rooted in mystical Christianity. And then they're blended with like Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah. And the Golden Dawn also was blended with something called like Hermetic Kabbalah, which was basically like, that was inspired by the Jewish Kabbalah, but it was like kind of taking some of the Judaism out of it and making it a little more... I don't know, a little less religious and a little more philosophical, I guess you could say, a little more magical, I guess. But nowadays we see all kinds of crazy, like Christian Kabbalah and pagan Kabbalah and whatever. It was never my thing. So anyway, I think it cannot be understated the influence that the Golden Dawn has on all modern magical, well, particularly witchcraft traditions. If you're creating a magic circle and calling on watchtowers or quarters of each direction, working with the archangels and that sort of thing. All of this has Judeo-Christian roots. This was not something that the ancient Celtics were, the ancient Celtic farmers and pagans were doing. This all comes from like the grimoire tradition, Solomonic magic, Christianity, and the Golden Dawn. All that ritual format comes directly from that, books of Solomon and such, which is, it's still fascinating though. I still love it. But anyway, I think a really good now in powwow we don't really use any of that stuff. Certainly, as in my work as a hexameister, I combine my powwowing with my training as a traditional witch, and so that all of that is combined and really fleshes out what I do, like ceremonially on my own, in private as a hexameister. But these things, while I learned them during my time as a witch, I understand their roots. They go back deeper. They go back older than that, and they have very Christian and Judeo-Christian roots. And so I think they are a really good ritualistic accompaniment to my hexameister work. I also think too it's really interesting that like the history of magic that we have is very Christian. Well, it's just very Christian, like the cunning men and such. I think like the Whisperers from Poland and the Pellers and the Cunning Men and Women and the Charmers from Ireland and the Braucherin, like all of these were Christian-based magic. And even like the Keys of Solomon, around the same time that the Rosicrucian guy was creating the runes based on the Hebrew alphabet, the Keys of Solomon had worked their way into sort of like Nordic territory, and so they took all those Keys of Solomon and they were inspired. This is around like the 1800s, because the runes and the like the staves and such that you see in modern like Germanic / Nordic paganism, they're about 200 years old. They're not ancient Viking anything. These things were not created during the Viking Age. The Viking Age was just a very short period of time, relatively speaking. But they come from the Rosicrucians for the runes, or a Rosicrucian for the runes, and then the Keys of Solomon for all those symbols, which were then changed around the 1800s to be more like Germanic and Viking, with quotes. But they come from Old Testament ceremonial magic. It's all very interesting. I love the history of magic because the more we learn, the more we understand it and the more it makes sense. And the more we can do away with those fantasy histories like, you know, like the world was the mist of Avalon and then Christians came through and killed everybody. That's not true. That's not actually how it was. And even if you see the parallels between ancient Druids and the very early Christians and the teachings of Christ himself, you will see that the Druids were a lot more quote-unquote Christian than you are led to believe by people like Ted Andrews and Llewellyn Publications. So history is important, and it's fascinating. It's interesting. Don't be afraid to learn it. I love learning all kinds of stuff about magical history, and especially the stuff that changes my knowledge on things that I thought I knew or things I was taught that were wrong or whatever. I mean, it's important to get that history. The 90s and early 2000s really cluttered the world with a lot of misinformation, false history, wishful thinking, fantasy, and bullshit. I mean, let's face it, it did. And so we were all running around with false ideas, and only now and you know, we're just smarter now. We have access to more information than we did then. And so we're able to find the truth of these things. And I think it's so important to recognize that no matter what you practice, no matter what your religion is or your magical tradition or whatever, find out the actual history. Even if you don't like it, it's okay. Just acknowledge where it comes from and say, I am doing something different now, based on this thing, inspired by this old thing, but what I'm doing is something new. And there's nothing wrong with doing something new. But don't muddy up history, especially during this time when books are being banned and culture is being fucked with by the people in charge. We've got to preserve history. It's so important. So let's just be honest with ourselves, be honest where our stuff comes from, but also recognize the Golden Dawn. Like, thank God for them in a way, even though like some people thought they were a joke and they were kind of an eclectic mess. I get that, but I mean, they really did pave the way and lay the groundwork and foundation for so many modern magical traditions. And so we should at least, like, no matter what we do or what we believe, just give them a quick little salute, like, thanks, Golden Dawn. But that's it. Hopefully this was interesting. I don't know. It's Saturday. I've had a bad day. Yeah, it was a bad day. I wanted to go for a bike ride this morning, so Bill and I went to the island for a bike ride. But there was this like march for suicide awareness, so there were 150 billion people there. There was like a marching band. I had a panic attack. It was too many people. I said, we're going home right now. And then there was this issue with my phone and T-Mobile, and it was just, I ended up taking like this 3-hour nap in the afternoon just to like shut down and just retreat. I took the nap here on the floor in this room. So I had to like find my center and just like watch a video about the Golden Dawn. And now here I am talking to you guys. So anyway, hopefully that was somewhat interesting, educational. I don't know. But that's it. God bless you all. Have a good weekend. Love you guys.